Here we are. It's hot. Everything is dying. But that's the way it is in summer in Victoria. Now, today I want to look at an exceptionally important question, because we need to be able to look at things and be able to analyse what's happened and the responses, because sometimes they don't coincide. Now, by now we're all aware of the atrocities that occurred on Bondi Beach 2 weeks ago. The indiscriminate slaughter of Jewish people, irrespective of their age or gender, at a religious festival, an important religious festival at Bondi Beach. Something which that community had been practicing for years in that particular location. And what we saw on that day was two men, a father and son, who had sworn allegiance to ISIS, who somehow believed that if you kill people you have disagreements with, that somehow life will change. Well, it won't. Now, what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is a reaction you'd expect, especially in a community that has for some time had to, or elements of that community had to justify what's happening in Gaza and to a lesser degree in the West Bank. But obviously what we are seeing now is a reaction by both a reluctant government, by an opposition who believes they can make capital out of this atrocity, and by sections of the legacy media and social media, I should say asocial media, who somehow believe that pushing what is described as an anti-Semitic message will resolve the issue. Well, the fact is, let's look at the facts. One of these men was born in India and had lived in this country for over 30 years. His son was born in this country. Secondly, obviously they developed ideas which coincided with the ideas that ISIS has been trying to implement over the past decade. Now, ISIS is a group which uses religious rhetoric to justify its slaughter of Shia Muslims, Christians, atheists, gays, transsexuals, Hindus, anybody who doesn't fit its myopic view or its interpretation of the Quran. Now, obviously, today we don't conflate the ideas that have been promoted viciously by ISIS has anything to do with Islam. There is a division, and we see that in Christian fundamentalists. We see the story of the expansion of Christianity through the Middle East and the colonies and the atrocities which were committed on behalf of their God. So it's wrong to equate the delusional beliefs of a group that believes that if you must physically eradicate all the people who disagree with you, with the beliefs of a religion which is followed by over 1 billion people. Now let's move forward to Australia at the end of 2025, the beginning of 2026. Obviously, the atrocities which occurred at Bondi Beach can never in any way be acceptable to anybody. It was an atrocity against Australians going about their religious beliefs in a public place. We saw children, men and women, slaughtered indiscriminately because the two men involved somehow believed that these were apostates. These were people that needed to be eradicated. Now, what their belief system was based on is something we can only think about. But let's look at a few facts. One, these were not men from the Middle East. Two, the fact is that it's obvious that what they were doing was following an ideology and a strategy which had been formulated by this ideology to spread terror and ultimately, as we saw in southern Iraq, take over large swathes of the Muslim world and impose their belief system. Now, what we are seeing today is a similar situation happening, where people are conflating anti-Semitism, which that atrocity was an anti-Semitic act, with support for the Palestinian struggle, with support for Palestinian independence, and more importantly, an end to the atrocities and genocide that's occurring in Gaza. Now, we lost 15 Australians 2 weeks ago. In Israel, over 1,300 people were executed by Hamas when they broke out of Gaza. Over 2,000 Israeli soldiers has died in the battle against Gaza. And we've seen not only the deaths of over 70,000 Palestinians, but we've seen the wholesale destruction of that society, where over 90% of infrastructure has been destroyed through bombing raids. We've seen over 70,000 people killed, most of them not militants, at least 1/3 children under 15. We've seen medical facilities obliterated, places of worship, including Christian places of worship, obliterated. We've seen hunger used as a weapon. We have seen atrocities that we have not seen since the Vietnamese and Biafran struggle almost 50 years ago, over 50 years ago. So the issue is, not all members of the Jewish community support their government. Not all members of the Jewish community harbour separatist thoughts regarding Palestinians. During the past 2 years, we've seen pro-Palestinian demonstrations, but more importantly, we've seen people express their disgust of what's been happening in Gaza. So now we're entering a critical phase of life in this country, where definitions are being changed to suit both short-term and long-term political goals. For example, we use the word anti-Semite to describe hatred which is directed at people of Jewish background. Now you've got to remember the Jewish population, like any population, is a divided population. There are Jews who live in Israel, who support their government, and there are people who identify as Jews who don't live in Israel, who support what's happening in Israel. But there are many Jewish people who don't support what is happening in Gaza and the West Bank. And you see them at these demonstrations and speaking at demonstrations regarding the activities of the Israeli state. So now we are seeing a push to expand the definition of anti-Semitism and to use the law to ensure that definition is adhered to by everybody in the community. And that's the danger we face. Being against the excesses of the Israeli state is not anti-Semitism. I am quite disgusted by the activities of the Putin-led Russian government in the Ukraine and the ensuing death. Now, that doesn't mean that we should pass legislation based on people's nationality, whether they're Russian or not. Although we have seen this to some extent in the sporting arena, where Russians couldn't participate in the Olympics, couldn't participate in Eurovision, and the list goes on and on. Now, what we see in North Korea, which is a secular state, again highlights the violence of that state. But that doesn't mean that we're going to pass legislation to exclude North Koreans because they live. So anti-Semitism does not equate with protests and discussion regarding the excesses of the Israeli state. But what we're seeing in this country at the minute is people trying to equate anti-Semitism with Zionism, which is a political ideology, and the activities, the actions of the Israeli state. And if you're against the brutality and the genocide of the Israeli state, you're an anti-Semite. And nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is that you're against the activities of a particular government, whether they like to think of themselves as a Jewish state or whatever. It's a little bit like not raising our voices against the activities of the Iranian state, which calls itself an Islamic state. Now, obviously, there are many activities of the Iranian state which people don't support, which people protest against, although it's a religious-based state based on Islam, or their interpretation, a Shia interpretation of Islam. But then at the same time, we have this movement in this country predominantly by people who have supported the excesses of the Israeli state in the Middle East, now claiming they want legislation put in place to stop people from criticising the Israeli state, its actions and its activities. So now we are seeing the extension of that debate. Anti-Semitism isn't just actions against a group because of their particular origins, their particular beliefs, although many Jews are secular. They have no belief in the Torah. Many Jews are atheists. Some of the most famous people of a Jewish background, like Marx and Lenin, were atheists. So the fact is that we need to resist any attempts to equate anti-Zionism with the actions and activities of an Israeli state that believes that violence and apartheid is the only solution to what they describe as the Palestinian question. And irrespective of what happens in this country, or what's happened in Gaza, what happens in the West Bank, what happens in Israel, what happens in any corner of the world, we will continue to find ourselves in this situation while the Palestinian question isn't resolved with the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, to call for a creation of a Palestinian state is Australian government policy. They've changed their tune in the last few months because of the atrocities and the excesses of the Israeli state. So is the Australian government an anti-Semitic government? Is anybody who participates in a pro-Palestinian demonstration anti-Semitic? Well, obviously, it depends on who wants to change that definition, because historically Semitic means people of Jewish and Arabic background. That's the historical definition. But today it's seen as specifically anti-Jewish. So we are at a juncture. Will we allow voices that are trying to make political capital out of the Bondi atrocity to triumph by extending the definition of anti-Semitism to one which does not allow people to protest regarding what's happening in Gaza, to one which criminalises the activities of people who wish to see the establishment of a Palestinian state, and to one where the definition of anti-Semitism becomes so broad that anything which the Israeli state does is beyond public criticism. We see these debates begin and splutter. The important thing is that you can pass all the legislation you want. The fact is that hatred, because of religious differences, is something the human race has put up with for thousands of years, and we see mass slaughter on an industrial scale by people who somehow believe their beliefs are the only true beliefs. Their God is the only true God, and then they have carte blanche to do what they like in order to put forward their particular position. War, death, destruction, based on human interpretation of religious texts. I think it's important that during this critical period that we raise these issues despite a backlash in the community which is based on the horror of that day, not based on the reality which goes beyond that day, a reality that will be with us for generations unless we resolve this issue. To conflate ISIS with Islam is as ignorant as conflating anti-Semitism with the activities of the State of Israel.